Welcome to Retire Mentorship, your mentor to and through retirement. I'm your host, Freeman Lindy, certified financial planner. Today, we take a break from our normal content to give you an interview with a friend of mine, Anthony Schmidt. Anthony and his wife Miranda have pulled off a stunning feat by paying off nearly $500,000 in total debt. That includes their home, and they are now debt-free with all of their 30s left in front of them. We talk quite a bit about how to work together in a marriage towards the same financial goals and how to communicate about your finances and what's important to you. We also talk about how being debt-free gives you certain abilities to help people, to be generous, and how generosity can be a thread throughout all of your finances, not just when you have quote-unquote made it. We also talk a little bit about retirement and what exactly that can mean and how to make it more meaningful. All that's coming up on the special episode of the Retire Mentorship Podcast. Anthony, appreciate you being here on the Retire Mentorship Podcast. Obviously, we had the intro already, but I'll let you tell us your story. I guess what has been your journey through your financial planning and your financial story?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting too. I got married, it was about 8 years ago, to my wife Miranda, and it's been a fun, ever-changing journey since then. You and I got to know each other, I want to say 5 years ago, maybe?
Sounds
pretty
right.
Good number? Yeah, so maybe right through the middle of us trying to be intentional and take this serious. A lot of our beginning of our marriage, the first few months at least, was trying to understand each other. I think, for those of us that are married, maybe listening to this, there's always an assumed role for each person in the marriage. Whether you're a husband or a wife, a lot of those tools you think about of how you grew up and how your mom and dad reacted to the other spouse, you try to set those rules and expectations for your spouse as well. And I think that was a really good story of how we started. We both grew up in very loving and strong, supportive parents. All of our parents are still married, but certainly were married at that time too, and I think that's somewhat rare. But growing up through that, both of our parents are very different. So we have had a unique circumstance with growing up and having a couple jobs pretty much all the time in my life. My wife being super intelligent, really well educated, having a nursing degree and working some crazy overnight shifts and just living different lives. Much of our beginning of our marriage was living in the same house, working different shifts and working often. So we had some challenges that we had to address. And I know you've talked about the Ramsey Show and Dave Ramsey a handful of times in this podcast, but that was really the first set of tools that we found and were gifted for our marriage. I remember specifically at the gift opening of our marriage, a buddy of mine that we used to work together at the archery shop that we own. It was a book called The Total Money Makeover. And at the time, if we need more money, I'll just work more. I know that's where money comes from, and that was a pretty easy thing for me to acquire, but it did give us the tools to have a good relationship with money, at least in a marriage. And I think that's what the Ramsey program did for us specifically. It was a great pre- and post-marriage prep. Mm-hmm. So I think that's where we started with it all. And it's come full circle. We've been married for 8.5 years now. Every chapter of our marriage certainly has different struggles, but finances and what we do with our money isn't one of those bones of contention like it is for a lot of marriages. It's not because we have too much or don't have enough. It's because we know what to do with it when we get it. They provide some interesting tools for a marriage because they force you to talk about things that you just otherwise won't talk about. Mm-hmm. I think it's easier to sweep a lot of these conversations under the rug and act like they're not important or they don't happen. But no different than we were talking before the podcast. Sometimes the element of change is harder than the element of doing other things too. Mm-hmm. So that's what the Ramsey program is, and that's what we've done for our whole marriage.
And do you feel like, how does aligning the interests of both spouses, how important is that in achieving something like getting out of debt all the way through your home, or kind of maybe walk us through? Is that something that you guys were aligned with from day one, or is that something that you're constantly having to kind of reevaluate? Because we have a lot of issues with, one spouse really wants to spend money over here and the other one wants to spend money over there, and maybe not valuing each other's desires or wants. And how do you align all those things to go in one direction for as long as you
you guys did?
I think the one thing I truly didn't realize when we first started this is that, I would speak in words and she would hear in pictures. And I think that's a discounted attribute in a lot of marriages, but all spouses do that. I have a goal and a vision for our family, but it didn't necessarily include Miranda's wants, desires, expectations. We both have very different backgrounds. We have very different presence at work. There's no question that both individuals in this marriage bring completely different things to the table too. And without that program, we just wouldn't have set our goals for the future together. And I think that's what personal finance and combining your bank accounts and using the same debit card, all of these things are more or less a forced habit that cause us to make decisions together. It's really hard to have a future together, or at least look forward to something, unless you're making these choices actively together. Whether they happen or not is almost irrelevant, but it's living for the future together. And without combined worlds, it's really tough to do that. But I think the interesting part about what the Dave Ramsey program is that it's a very basic rubric to follow. One can make an argument that it's not fantastic retirement advice or investing advice, but it is a simple rubric to follow if you want to have success long-term in your life. And I think that at baseline, that's truly what it is. It's probably more of a marriage class than it is a personal finance class, because you're now forced to talk about, do we have kids? Do we not have kids? If we have kids, how do we pay for daycare? How are we going to live through college years with them? All these things truly come up. That just would have been swept underneath the rug or talked about too late if they wouldn't have had time to plan. I think there's a true element here with online trading services, E-Trade, Ameritrade. There's a million different ways that you can invest your money. But to your point earlier, all of us are going 100 different directions on a daily basis. And without an individual to help keep you accountable and say, this is what we're pulling out every month, let's have a yearly or annual review of, here's your allocation and here's why we did this and here's where we might make some adjustments and here's why we might not. It's really hard to get that from an online source because we're just not going to spend the time to look at it. That's why human interaction is so important with all this stuff. You've had at least I've asked you every year and you've said yes every year. So it's been a blessing for us to have you come and speak to the class, not necessarily as Freeman Lindy. It's as, here's what retirement can be. Here's what habits provide. And at the end of every 10-minute speech you get to the class, the answer is choice. More time gives us more options, more choice. More money gives us more options, more choice. And that's really what this conversation about retirement, this podcast, can be about. It's options and choice, long term.
Do you think that obviously it takes some kind of sacrifices to get where you've gotten and to achieve what you've achieved in the time you've achieved it? And, you're at a place now that many people don't get to until 50s, 60s. Some people never get there. And that wasn't without giving some things up in the past. Looking back on it now with, some of the freedoms and choices you have now, but with time that you'll never get back, right? Because we can always make more money. We can always save more dollars. We can always spend more, that's for sure. But we can never get back the time. And as you look back and kind of weigh that out, was it worth it? And would you do it the same way if you had to do it over again?
Loaded question, but I have one simple regret, I'd say, of the last 7 or 8 years of my life, and that's trading time for money. I think there are a lot of people that do that actively on a daily basis, thinking that money is truly their God, and that's what's going to give them joy, happiness, and peace, good marriage, great kids. But truly it is a tool, and it's the furthest thing away from joy, happiness, and peace. Many years professionally, I traded exactly that. More money for less time. Actively made that choice. And now on the other side of that, it's convenient for me to say that time is certainly more important. But those choices for a short period of time in our lives afforded us the option to have more opportunities and more choices. So in our 30s, it's easy for me to say there's plenty of time left. But a lot of that time I chose to work away for a specific reason. I think The challenge and the fright was when I see husbands and wives work and work and work for more possessions, more consumeristic ideals, things that aren't making them happier, but it's what they see on Instagram and Snapchat that drives them. The new four-wheeler, the new truck, the new house, the second house, the next vacation. All of these things are fun. But truly, if you're working 80 to 100 hours a week to attain a lifestyle that can take or leave, I can tell you that it's not worth the squeeze. Now, we had a big pile of debt to clean up. So we paid off $461,000 to my memory, something like that. It's just under $500,000 in those 6 or 7 years that it took us to get there. So we had a lot of consumer debt. We had student loans. We had vehicles. We were that family that was middle class, living the lives of our peers and some of our customers that were a few clicks above us. And we wanted to fit in. We wanted to be the Alaska, Wisconsin couple, and we just wanted that persona. We wanted people to believe that we were there too. All of those possessions and all that pseudo-happiness certainly didn't fill a void that we were looking for. So I think, to your point, time for money, there's always a balance between that, but I think trying to set a goal and work for it in a short period of time, you can choose to sacrifice a lot of things for a longer term gain. Mm-hmm. But choosing to work and work and work and work without a vision for your money, it's just foolish.
You can speak as much or as little to this as you want, but how has, with as much as you're willing to share with, the birth of your daughter and having to have some freedom there, or having to rearrange priorities in a hurry, with that, how has the financial freedom of being through where you are, has that helped, hindered, no effect on when life throws you a curveball and when you need to make adjustments?
Oh, we could even back up a little before that. So I believe it was December of 19 or January of 20, we paid our house off. And that was our last debt. It was the last domino in the entire house. And at that point, I'm really excited about setting these big, hairy, audacious goals because I really like achieving. Even if it's something that we fail at, there's still a lot of success in failing up. So we paid off the house, and then there was this gap where, we took a couple trips, hit up a couple different countries, and just had a lot of fun, but quickly realized that all of that fun really doesn't fill a void in your soul either. So Miranda and I started asking ourselves, why did we do this? Was there another reason? And we're a very strong Christian family. We have belief and purpose that's higher than us. We are a God-fearing family, no question. And at that point, one of my closest friends was diagnosed with skin cancer. Quickly traveled to his brain, and it was a hard time for him and his wife, no question. And we were able to help them along in that chapter. Wasn't quite a year, but we were able to walk with them through that hard time. And I'm not sure we would have been able to do that unless all of our debt was paid off. Because all those choices come with a financial dependent risk too. Mm-hmm. Fast forward to 6 or 8 months into that, the four of us were living together with their dog and our dog, and you can imagine some of the best nights, and also some of the most emotional, some of the most real, when you're dealing with some of your close friends going through what should have been end of life at that point, stage 4 brain cancer. Soon after that, my wife gets pregnant. We're well into our 30s, having our first kid. We're super excited, but there's a laundry list of emotions going through all of this. Great pregnancy. I remember the week that Stella was born, our first daughter. We were at the gym, and Miranda, my wife, was deadlifting more than me. It's like the most emasculating thing ever. And I think, we've talked about this many times, but she is one strong girl, mentally, emotionally, physically. And then some crazy things happened. Had to deliver early, had to rush her to the hospital. Things weren't what they expected, and it was a simple case of preeclampsia, but her blood pressure was way over 200, and things weren't going well. Organs were shutting down, and to save you all the crazy details, it was time to become parents immediately. So all of these things happen for a reason, and I truly think the only thing we didn't have to be uber concerned about was our finances. We knew that our house was paid off. We don't have credit cards. We're not carrying vehicle mortgages and things like that. And it's we live below our means. We don't make our God money or our possessions. But it was, simply put, one less thing we didn't have to worry about. And there are so many families in the NICU that has to be priority one and concern one. How do I get to work? How do I provide for my family? If my wife can't work, I need to be at work, but I also should be a present husband and father as she goes through this trauma. All those emotions are very real for a lot of NICU families, and it was 64 days that we were there. And we had some incredible support. Some of those nurses are some of our closest friends now. So having that support system to walk us through it just allowed us not to be uber concerned about our own situation, so we can help other people too. And I think that's where joy and happiness can be found in a Christian relative conversation, I suppose.
Yeah. It seems like just throughout this, then generosity's kind of come up as a few times, like the ability to maybe spend less on interest payments and have more choices around that. How has generosity played a role in your all's financial situation?
So in the beginning of this whole process, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I understood money as something more or less a tool that could provide things that I wanted to provide for my family. So if I wanted a new vehicle, I'd just work more, right? That's the only lens that I saw money through. And then as our marriage developed, and so did our walk with faith, I saw money as something that we could save so we could benefit future generations. And then we could start to give it too, and that was a unique concept for me. It was giving things away. It was a unique muscle that I forced myself to exercise. It truly is. The giving muscle was a difficult thing for me in the beginning. Money can only be 3 things. You can spend it on things that you want, you can give it away to things or people that you love, and you can save it. Those are the only 3 things that you can do with money. Of course, there are subcategories beyond that, but that's at 5,000 feet, that's what money can be, and that's what it is. I have never I like things. I like guns, I like weapons, I like vehicles. I would love a sports car someday that I can call my own. But I have never had more fun in my life than giving and blessing other people. And whether we're attached to it or not, whether people know about it or not, has very little to nothing to do with it, except the whole idea of what money can be to a lot of people. Whether it's $100 or $10,000, you can truly change somebody's life. And you don't know if that's the point where they make a choice to do something different. And that's what's so unique. And establishing those habits and those muscles, watching my wife give, she's better at it than I am, like many things, but it's an exciting conversation in our house. And it gives purpose.
Mm. Where does that fall? So I think there's this thought that, once I get X, then I can be more generous. When I make it to this milestone, income-wise or debt-wise or savings-wise or whatever, then I can give more money away. And I think one of the things that this year in particular has shown us as we look through people's tax returns to do all this planning and whatnot. And one of the things that they changed for 2020 is they allowed this $300 above the line deduction for charitable distribution or charitable giving. So normally you'd have to give a certain amount where you're giving plus some of the other things would allow you to itemize and you could kind of see how much people were giving. But now, no matter if you chose a standard deduction or not, like anyone could deduct up to $300 as long as they actually gave it away. And so you would see all these returns come in, even some of the ones we did, and there was no correlation whatsoever between the amount of income that a household made and whether or not they had taken that deduction. Couples that make $300,000 a year, and the question is did you give $300 away to charity that we can deduct? And it'd be no. And other couples that make $35,000 a year with 4 kids at home, and yes. And so where do you see that? For you guys, where was that journey like, and was the giving only after you were debt free and making all kinds of money, or did it play a role before that?
It's been giving since we started the program, started our marriage, but it started very, very small. That was a muscle that, again, we had to exercise and exercise. outrageous giving didn't start until we tried to focus on paying off our house. I'll murder the Bible verse, and if I try to remember it, it's just going to be terrible. So I'll let all the listeners look it up. But there's an extent of, if you give with an open hand, more will come to you. And it's not some prosperity gospel cliche that I'm not about. But a lot of it has to do with, if you have an open hand, you can receive. More importantly, you can give. And more came to us after we opened up our hearts and opened up our homes and opened up our lives to a lot of different people to help them too. Very few people have ever asked for a whole lot of things, but there are so many opportunities, if you have your eyes open, of people that you can help at your church, people that you can work with outside of it, or people that you can just bless because you want to bless those people. I deal with a lot of people from a lot of different walks of life, some of which we spoke about just before the podcast started too, and people that are below the poverty line and people that make $2-3 million a year. What I see is generally people that have wealth have more tools to be blessings to other families. And of course, that's a generalization that can be fought tooth and nail many different directions. But it's really hard to help the weak if you're weak. The stronger you are, the more opportunity you have to help. But also, more money makes you more of who you are. So if you have a good heart and you just need to sand off some of those edges, works out pretty well. But if you're a guy that you just always looking out for yourself, not necessarily your family, money makes you more of that too.
Well, this podcast episode tagline is, your mentor to and through retirement, and so there's a lot of things that lead up to this concept of retirement, and a lot of things beyond when you flip that switch and decide to no longer, exchange time for money. And we haven't gotten around yet much to what does that actually look like beyond the financial standpoint. But as someone who probably, if you put your mind to it, could retire earlier than most people having reached the milestones you already have, what comes to mind when you think of retirement, or what do you think it could be versus maybe what a lot of people have kind of defaulted to it being?
I've had a change in my mind what retirement has been. Right now, for my wife and I, we've talked about retirement and why retire and what is retirement and what we want that chapter to look like. And I think if you took all of the excuses away from yourself and you forced yourself to have a conversation with a glass of wine with your spouse, what would that conversation be? It will blow your mind what your spouse has to say. It also blow your mind that you really haven't thought through it about what you want either. That's a really hard conversation to have. So what I see retirement being specifically is doing what I love, X, less often, with a whole lot of structure. I think structure gives us purpose, gives us a reason to wake up, but the task itself is almost secondary.
So I keep hearing this overarching theme too of having purpose behind your money and why you do the things that you do. And for people, maybe listeners who've never really thought about that, where can someone start looking for a purpose or finding it?
So my wife, many, many years ago, called me out on a few of the complaints. So we have a seasonal business. We work too many hours at a specific time of year. As a friend of mine put it, man, you're super underpaid 6 months out of the year, and you're super overpaid 6 months out of the year. And the whole idea of balance. And one night I came home, and it was just flat out crabby. And my wife called me out on a few things. She's like, well, if you don't like X, Y, or Z, why don't you just change it? So it allowed me to look at what are the things that I'm doing that I really don't care for? And why am I continuing to do those things? Some of them maybe out of necessity. The majority of them are just out of habit. And I think a lot of us get in these ingrained habits year after year. We've done things the way we've done things because that's the way we've done things. It's a terrible excuse, but it's 100% the reason. So defining the things that you truly don't enjoy doing, and then trying to give yourself some freedom to change those things. Mm-hmm. That's where the conversation starts. And it's really hard to look forward to something unless you have a vision of what you want it to be. Because you can't make a roadmap unless you know what you're trying to drive to.
Yeah. I think part of that too comes down to creating the time to do those things. I think that and we've done things together, and one of the things that we've looked at in the past is this busyness and hurried culture where everything's go all the time. And I think a lot of people don't create that time to sit down with a glass of wine with their spouse because we're overbooked, or we don't take off that weekend to go do some soul searching and some of those kind of things. And I think the enemy of great probably isn't bad or even good. It's probably just busy. We're just too busy doing everything we're doing all the time to stop and think, are we barking up the wrong tree? And some of those, and yeah, I don't know where I was going with that.
I feel like you and I have made a lot of conscious choices to eliminate some of that noise. I think there's a lot of noise that you and I have had being the generation that we are. I remember one of the first Bible studies you and I were at is that you shared with the group that you deleted your news apps off of your phone. And at that point in my life, I thought to myself, gosh, how are you even connected to the world? I think you were crazy. A couple months later, did the same thing. Deleted Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook off my phone. All of these time wasters are the things that take so much of your day because these apps are designed to engage you, lock you in, and continue that cycle. But I truly think if you write down your 8, 10, or 12-hour day at work, what you're doing each minute of every day, it will blow you away in where you waste and spend your time. But no different than your checkbook. Where you write your checks, where you spend your money on your online accounts. That's where your heart is. That's where your values are. And it's easy for one to argue that, wow, I can't believe I'm wasting my time doing this. Well, it's important to you. That's why. Now, whether you want it to be important to you in the future is a different thing. But moving forward, it's difficult to change. I think looking at some of those habits and taking away a lot of our smart devices, it can be such a blessing because it forces you to be present.
Yeah. We also talked some about just mindset and beliefs and things on this podcast, and I don't think that anyone achieves much without some consistent mindset and effort and perseverance on one train of thought. And I think getting out of as much debt as you did as fast as you did, and just many other things I know about you, have shown that to be the case for people who are looking to kind of help develop that mindset of being smart with their money or being intentional with their time or finding a purpose or any of the things that maybe we've discussed. Are there any resources, books, podcasts, or otherwise that you've enjoyed from your repertoire that you would point people in that direction?
I think, without a doubt, the one book that really helped frame money in my mind, Financial Peace, yeah, obviously we've talked about that enough too, but Rabbi Daniel Lapin wrote a book, of course now
Thou Shalt Prosper.
Thou Shalt Prosper. It's not a book based on Christianity, it's based on faith and how Judaism looks at Christianity and kind of the flaws in how we were raised to view money. Money is a tool. Money is a tool to do good things. And without it, you can do less good things. But it helped me take some of the taboo away from being a Christian, wanting wealth, wanting to be able to work often and make more money to do more good things. It just allowed the framework in my mind to be painted a little bit differently. There's always some shame around growing up in a Catholic household with money and the offering plate, and just things just weren't always talked about. And I think that's what this book allowed me to view, is what money can be as a Christian. It can be good things. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean that you should give it all away. It means that you should do some fun things with it, but you should also bless other people around you too. So that was a fantastic book, and I'm sure there are many others.
Unfortunately, that one doesn't come in an audiobook, so I haven't read it yet.
I can't imagine. So Rabbi Daniel Lapin has been on the Dave Ramsey Show a couple times, and he is a hilarious speaker. Like, he's a funny dude. It's too bad. Maybe we should reach out to him and see if we just do his audiobook.
Let's do it. Let's use your poll with the Dave Ramsey organization. Make that
It's the least we could do.
It's the least we could do. Anything else that you, from just your experience with money or money in marriage or work or any of those things, that you would love to share?
We're figuring this stuff out as we go. I'm not the old crusty husband that says this is the way and the only way, and we're not going to make modifications. We make modifications every month. setting up a monthly budget meeting with your spouse is as close to life and death as you can get. Otherwise, things will happen by accident. You'll wonder why they happen that way. Mm-hmm. And we haven't missed a budget meeting in almost 8 years. Those budget meetings have ended with tears, screaming, crying, all the fun things. But it tells us that we're communicating about the things that we need to be too, in a healthy manner. A book that you and I read a handful of years ago, you introduced me to this book, Freeman. Is it the 12-month year?
12-week year.
12-week year, rather. It could be a really useful tool for a lot of us to read once a year. Mm-hmm. Rather than develop our habits, or at least our goals, in a year format, now it forces us to do this in the quarter by the week. It forces us to look at what's coming up for the next 4 weeks, 12 weeks, and then figure out a plan to get there. Great way to establish steam and keep moving forward too. And that's a great book that you could read with your spouse and implement some ideas. No question, what you think your spouse wants probably isn't what your spouse wants. So, great book, great book.
Yeah.
Sure.
And for people who are interested, we actually did a Retire Reads, a little mini pod episode on the 12-week year back in April, I think. So if you want a 4 or 5 minute overview of what that book is, you can scroll back in your podcast feed to April, I think, and find that. So good. Well, Anthony, I appreciate you coming on today and just chatting money and marriage and life. And we'll see you guys on Friday. We'll have a few action items for you. And we'll see you then.
This podcast is educational only and is not intended to be investment, legal, or tax advice or recommendations, whether direct or incidental. Again, this is not investment advice. Consult your financial, tax, and legal professionals for specific advice related to your specific situation. Never take investment advice from someone who doesn't know you and your specific situation. All opinions expressed in this podcast are the opinions of the speakers expressing them. All performance referenced is historical and is no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Retire Mentorship is not affiliated with or controlled by any registered investment advisor, broker-dealer, or other financial services company.